And go. All right, so it is 9 o'clock in the New York time zone, and we have a very special webinar today, one we haven't done before, but one that probably will be very useful for the many students who are now finishing up their ex-culture reports. As it always happens, in this last week, we receive a lot of questions, a lot of notes from students who are frustrated, who are panicking, and who are desperately trying to write a good report in these remaining few days. And so what we did is invited several professors and several coaches, and we have already several people here in the virtual webinar room. There will be probably more joining in a few minutes. And so these people are special in the sense that they have read a lot of ex-culture reports. So the instructors, the coaches have participated, many of them several times in ex-culture. They've read their share of the reports, and they know what the common mistakes are. They also know what the good things about those reports are. The coaches not only read the reports, like the whole thing, but also every week they were reading the weekly submissions. So they kind of have been following your progress from the time when you submitted just the initial ideas all the way to the final drafts that you submitted last week. And so what I asked them to do is to simply share their impressions, tell us what those reports look like, and then point out some of the frequently occurring problems, deficiencies in those reports, as well as provide some tips for the last-minute revisions or updates or improvements teams can do in these remaining few days. So if your report is still not finished and you still have a few days and you would like to improve it, this session hopefully will provide that sort of insight, advice, tip for you to make a much better report in the remaining 72 hours or so we have before the deadline. And so I suggest we do it informally. So rather than doing formal presentations with slides and everything, I suggest we just go one by one and one tip at a time or one observation at a time, one recommendation at a time. I thought about structuring it along the kind of structure of the report so that we talk a little bit about the executive summary and then each section and then writing style and then maybe referencing style. But I think it doesn't have to be in that order, so it can be general impressions. And the only thing that I would ask you to do is that one, try to be short and practical. So rather than talking about, the field of, academic writing in general, try to focus on specific problems and provide specific, actionable, practical tips. And second, since there are so many of us here in the webinar room, it is always a good idea to mute your microphones unless you're talking. So otherwise we may have feedback and may have some interferences. So you have this mute microphone button there. So it's always a good idea to keep it muted. And then when you talk, you just unmute it. And so that way it will probably give us better sound quality overall. And maybe before we go, would you guys like to do quick introductions so we know who is here? So you know me, I'm Bas Taras. I'm the coordinator for this project. I'm the one who sends out all those annoying emails and reminders. And if you don't do your survey, for example, I send then an angry reminder one more time. And we have a number of professors and coaches here. So if you would like to maybe take a second and introduce yourself. On my screen, Amanda is listed as the first one. So Amanda, would you like to maybe go first and introduce yourself? And then Bob, and then Domenico, Hendrik, and Victoria.
Sure, I'm Amanda. I'm a professor at University of Delaware, and I do this course with graduate students in a global leadership course. And I've been doing it now for 2 years. I've been with ex-culture. Love it, love the project. Stretches the students, they appreciate it more when it's done.
Right, yeah, that's always the case. Frustration during the project, relief, and like, oh, actually it was useful after the project. Okay, Bob, would you like to take a second and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Bob Stevens. I'm a professor at Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania, and I've been doing the ex-culture project with my undergraduate students here for about 4 years, I think. Also a great experience for the students here.
Okay, thank you so much. Domenico, are you one of the panelists or you're a student who's just attending? Maybe introduce yourself either way. All right, well, let's move on then to Hendrik. I know Hendrik is one of the coaches and has been very active as far as providing feedback to the students throughout the semester. So Hendrik, would you like to take a couple of words about yourself?
Yeah, hello, I'm Hendrik. I'm a head coach this semester, did the coaching program last semester, and participated in Excalibur as a student in 2015. I'm currently based in Austria and working actually, but I have 1 hour spare time, so it's not a problem.
Okay. Welcome, welcome. Now, Victoria, I see you're a student, but if I may take a second, and I have a message for you. Apparently, we have 2 emails for you in our system, and I met about your case yesterday with my assistant. There was some sort of confusion as to which one is active, and so we seem to be losing all your records. So you might want to contact Simone and see what's going on there, because you're getting high peer evaluations, but we didn't get any of your weekly surveys, and I think that's because of that email confusion. So yeah, so the one with the dot and one without the dot after that. So, but anyway, would you like to introduce yourself quickly? Okay, I'm not sure if we have the sound. Yeah, you don't have the microphone. That's fine. All right, well then let's get directly to our observations problems, and I guess let's pretend that we are around a round table and everyone is equal. So just talk whenever you feel like that, and I'm not sure who wants to start. Again, Amanda is number 1 on my screen, so I don't know if you, Amanda, maybe want to just start the discussion, but feel free to chime in anytime and add your insights and observations whenever you have something to say.
I'm happy to go first if I'm sitting in the first spot. I think that's because I joined last. I don't know the call. So I do this with graduate students, and I always think when you're presenting a report, the best advice is to make that report as easy for the audience, the readers, as possible, to give you a good grade. And when each of the professors for each of the classes have 15 students or 30 students or 100 students, that means they have 15, 30, or 100 reports to grade, and they want to do a good job. And the easiest way that I tell my students to do that is to actually include the executive summary. I believe it is a requirement for the final delivered report. I still, even though I have in my syllabus very specifically, make sure you have a good executive summary, because that is where I will start when I start grading. Sometimes they don't include one at all, or they don't understand what a good executive summary is. So if you Google or do an internet search for how to write an executive summary, there's some pretty good articles out there. There's an Inc.com one that pops up at the top of the list that I've given my students in a different course, in a communications course. And an executive summary is not a detailed table of contents. We don't need you to tell us that the introduction section is going to give us an introduction of the case, and that the analysis section is going to give us the analysis. We know that. The executive summary should be a summary of the problem, how you did the work in the analysis, and what your recommendations are for, in this case, for this project. And if there's an ask, if there's something that you want the client to actually do as a next step, that should come at the end. All right, so here's the problem that we addressed, here's how we did that, here are the recommendations we are going to make, and here's what we specifically need from you, the client, or here's what we specifically recommend you to do next. This many dollars should go to this, etc. The more specific, the better, but concise in a couple of pages. And then the whole report that comes after that is all of the supporting detail that backs up what the executive summary said. So when I grade these, and I won't speak for all of the other professors, but I go to the executive summary first, and if all of that content is there and it makes sense and it's logical, I then go to all the details in the report should support everything that was said in the executive summary. And that makes it faster, easier, cleaner. And the process of writing the executive summary makes you go through that analysis of the final report. If you can't write the executive summary in that organized, detailed way, maybe something's missing from the report. So it's nice practice to make sure that all the details you want included in the report are there.
I'm very glad that you started with this advice, because this is probably the single most important tip or advice that you can ever get. Let me tell you something so you know how important that is. When I did X-Culture for the first time, the very first time, we had still a much smaller number of participants, very small, group, but it was still, like in very large in general, much bigger than the class. So I tend to have about 150 students, which means I have to read 150 reports. And when the first time I was trying to grade those reports, I foolishly asked my graduate assistant to print all those reports so I have a paper copy. And when 150 reports were printed, that's like this much paper. There is absolutely no way I can physically read them. Like even if I quit my job for a week, I would just, it's just too much. And then imagine we have 6 companies or 7 companies this semester, each of them getting somewhere between 70 to 250 reports. So they get it like this much paper up to this much paper. So I just, be honest with you, they will not read your reports fully. So what they will do, they will read the executive summaries. If they like something there, if they like the ideas there, if it catches their attention, they will go to the rest of the report to see more details. So therefore, it's the most important thing that you need to do in the report. Another related issue here is talking about being concise. Many students always ask me how many pages the report should be, worrying that they will not have enough pages. Here, it's the opposite. The shorter, the better. If you can squeeze it in 10 pages, do it in 10 pages, as long as you can say everything you want to say, because nobody has the time to read your 50, 60, 70 pages. Be as short as possible, and if you know what you want to say, you don't need more pages. The time when students write more pages, that's when they don't know what to say, and they dump whole Wikipedia articles there, and they dump anything and everything they can find on the web. That's bad. So try to be as short as possible, because the executives will have just too much to read and probably will not get to it if it's too long, too boring.
I'll chime in with a couple of thoughts there too. One of the things that I've had a few students ask me about are the use of bullet points. So going to Vas's point about being concise, I think the use of bullet points is a really good idea, but I've seen a lot of times when they are overused or used improperly as well. It's not appropriate to just do your whole paper in bullet points. The bullet points are used to draw attention to key details or to outline certain steps of a plan or process, but they aren't the be-all and end-all. So if you're going to use bullet points, they really should be integrated into some further explanation and just used as a highlight of that information rather than as the sole method of delivering all of your content. So, I mean, yes to bullet points, but be cautious there. Make sure that you do want to be brief and concise, but you want to add value through your report. You want to be able to have original ideas and content and be able to have a little bit of depth of information to support that. So again, as Vaz was saying, if a client company is, if you catch their attention in the executive summary, they might flip to another section and they're going to want additional information. They're going to want to see your original thinking and some of your support data and documentation there, rather than just a quick blast of bullet points.
Very valuable advice. Yeah, Henrik, would you like to add anything?
Yes, like the thing I prepared a list for some mistakes I have read in the report. But basically, what I want to say is that most of the students should have it build it as a triangle. They forgot to link the product with the company and the market. That's the main mistake I have read in the reports, like this semester and even last semester, that the students, they have a really good explanation about the product, but then they miss the link with the market, or they miss the link with the market and the company. So there should be some kind of triangle within this 3 components. And yeah, when this is like congruent and reasonable explained, the report is very well written. It's a really good report, but in most of the cases, this is not a good match. This is from my side what I can say.
Thank you. Thank you. I also see that we have Angelica and Barnabas joining us. And I know Angelica is one of the instructors. Barnabas, I'm not sure if you are a student or an instructor. But again, if you would like to add anything to the discussion, any tips and advice, feel free to unmute your microphone at any time and join the discussion. If I may pose a question, so the title page, it's a very important, probably the most important page of the report. And one thing that, for example, matters to me is that I easily can see who the team members are from the title page. I also like it very much when students not only add the names, but also add a couple of lines by each name explaining who did what. And the reason for that is sometimes when there is a problem in a particular report section, I might want to know who wrote that section. So in case my student is part of the team, I would like to know if it was my student's fault or maybe it was somebody else's fault. It's still going to be a team grade, but still sometimes kind of useful to know that. But other instructors, what are your impressions or comments on the title page? Anything specific that students should keep in mind when putting it together? And we'll then go section by section. Anyone? All right, so as I said, I'll just ask you one more time, make sure that all the names are there, the team number is there. Every semester, we have probably about 20 reports that we cannot identify. So we would have a submission, but for some reason there is no title page. And then the submission came from some sort of like, loveman223@gmail.com. And we have no idea who that person is. And so the report is good, but it's difficult to identify who is who. So make sure that you have your team number, team member information on the title page in case there is no other ID, we at least know who you are. We talked about the executive summary. Let's talk about the company description. So what are your impressions about the sections where teams describe the company, compare it to the competition, talk about the strengths and weaknesses? Anything interesting that you observed and any tips that you have on writing that particular section? Anyone?
Sorry. Just quickly, you need to explain the company and what it does and the problem that you are addressing very clearly. Just don't assume that, first of all, that the instructor remembers all of the details of each company and exactly what they do when they get them confused with each other. And you want to just show to the client, to the company itself, that you have a good understanding of what they do. It doesn't have to be pages and pages, but it does have to be stated. There are reports where people just assume that information is understood or assume that the reader understands that they understand it clearly and it's left out. So it's part of the beginning of the report. Clearly state who it is you're doing the report for and why, briefly.
Right, and yes, this section is more for instructors rather than for anyone else. The clients kind of know that information, but at the same time, they want to see that you know them. And especially, they seem to be most interested in the strengths and weaknesses section. So they want to know how you pursue their company compared to the competition. So that's something that they would like to get an external opinion on. So you might want to provide that as a concise, nice list. Anything else on this section?
I'm going to jump in with a general comment about really all, it applies to all the sections, but the evaluation rubric is really your best friend. It's in the guidelines are very clear, and there's a nice list of what the expectations are for each section in every company instruction. So just make sure you don't gloss over that. Read what the expectation is for that section.
Yeah. I saw Angelica was unmuting her microphone. So yes, please go ahead, unmute your microphone and ask your question. And then for everyone, again, keep your microphones muted when you're not talking so we don't have the feedback. Angelica, you sound like a chipmunk. I think it's one of the audio drivers that causes that problem. So it's unaudible, so just basically like a squeaking sound. And I've seen that before, so I don't think it's easy to fix. It could be your microphone built in the computer conflicting with your external web camera. That seems to happen most of the time. So you might want to maybe type your question because it's impossible to understand the sound. It happens all the time. I see it from time to time. Yeah. So you'll have to type your question because, as I said, the sound comes out as just, like sounds like an old modem or chipmunk. So meanwhile, let me ask you one more question, and this one is new, so I'm not sure how much you will have seen of this before, but maybe you can still give an advice. So this semester, for the first time, many companies asked students to conduct a survey of the kind of stakeholders. So they would say, well, go and reach out to the potential clients or potential decision makers. Like, for example, Unplag, the company that makes plagiarism detection software, they asked to survey school principals, deans of schools, students, and see what they think about using programs for detecting plagiarism. Who makes the decisions about buying them, how those decisions are made, what programs are used by the school or by the students, things like that. Or for example, Sakona asked to literally go to the local malls or maybe some other entertainment centers and talk to the managers of those centers and see if they want to use, or if they are using any of those gaming machines, and if they would be open to the idea of buying more from Sakona, why yes or why not, and things like that. And so many students seem to be struggling with presenting those data. So almost all teams collected some data. In fact, interestingly, we have some teams that surveyed up to 200 people. Like literally, we have some teams that surveyed a couple of hundred people, like huge data sets. Once we put it all together, it will be thousands of data points, enough for a study. But it seems like many of them are struggling with first, what to do with those data, and second, how to present them in the report. Any advice on how to do it, so that it's useful, in a useful form in the report itself? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll address that a little bit. So another aspect to the report that's really valuable, that helps those who are both the companies and the professors that are reading it to get to the key points, is to have good graphical presentation of data. So some charts, tables, anything that summarizes your data in an effective way is going to be extremely helpful for the company and for those that are looking for it. Now, again, I would say the same thing that I said with bullet points, though. I've seen student papers where it's nothing but charts, and there's no context to it, and there's no explanation of what they have. So you have to make sure that when you throw something in there as a chart or table, that you also refer to it and have some textual description to provide context. But that's, I think, and it's really impressive, those teams that do the survey and do a large sample size. That's a really good effort, and they need to make sure that they're presenting that in the best possible way, that they capture the value of the information and the data they've collected as well as possible.
Right. Yeah, maybe some sort of pivot tables or charts when appropriate, and then maybe some explanation of what those numbers mean. And if you would like to add like an appendix with the actual full data set, or maybe a link to a like Excel file with the data that you can store somewhere in the cloud, I suppose that would be useful in case the company wants to download the original data set.
I'll reiterate the same thing you guys just did. I find it very frustrating when anybody submits a report, student or otherwise, and there's tables or figures and things in there with no text explanation whatsoever. Don't make the reader or your client figure out why you've put that table in there and figure out what the x-axis means and the y-axis. Explain in a sentence or two might be sufficient. In this table, we show X, Y, and Z and point out exactly what the information is that's important in that data. Not all of the data from the research. In a nice, concise table with an explanation of why it's there, or a figure, or however it's going to be presented. I agree that that's important. And I've noticed that Angelica's question about how to get it down to 8,000 words for Forcia, she's got a specific question for Forcia. I won't answer, but how to get the report down, the tables and figures are a good idea. You can also use appendices, right? So all of that extra data, it could be a link to a cloud file, it could also go in the appendix. You could summarize it in a nice, concise way. Up front, here's the important information. Here are the outcomes of this data that we collected. And for more details, there might be 5 pages in the appendix that we found were very important. If somebody reading the report actually wants to go look in the appendix, great. If not, that's already been concisely provided for them up front in the paper.
Now, Angelica asked the question about Forcier, and this client, this company is different, at least with respect to one of the questions, or two questions. So they have a slightly different structure of the questions, and one of them asks for as extensive list as possible of all humanitarian and aid projects happening in Africa. And then they also ask for a list, again, as extensive as possible of all potential clients. So basically all agencies, all companies, NGOs that do humanitarian or other type of aid work in Africa. And so unlike with the other reports or clients where we would like them to be as short as possible, and even when they list, for example, potential distributors or retailers, we would like them to list only a few best ones. And in fact, we even want them to, students, to contact those potential retailers, partners, distributors, and then inquire if they might be interested in, for example, selling, I don't know, Sekona's gaming machines, or buying, I don't know, Unplugged's software, or whatever the client is. So there we want them to be short and as focused as possible. With Forcier, we kind of want the teams to provide as extensive list as possible. And that may be 5, 10, maybe even 20 potential projects or clients. So which may take some space. At the same time, it shouldn't be too long as far as the words, because no, they don't have to do SWOT analysis for each of them. So they might want to do SWOT, Forcier compared to others. Like, for example, strength, new company, very agile with some experience. Weaknesses, not as big as some other ones, maybe not as connected with the governments and governmental agencies as other ones. So that shouldn't take, more than a page comparing Forcier to other competition in general. But when it comes to list all potential clients or agencies that they might work with and all potential projects, all they literally need to do is just, name, contacts, maybe budget, maybe the scope, types of projects they do. So it shouldn't be more than a paragraph, maybe 10, 15 lines at most per company. And so even if they find, let's say, 10 projects that they think would be relevant to Forcier, it shouldn't take more than 3 pages or so to list them all with the key information and a link to the website. And maybe, I don't know, if you have the name of the contact person and the phone number added there. So it shouldn't be more than a few lines per company. It's okay to go, a few pages if you have multiple companies that are relevant, or projects or agencies. But it shouldn't be, that whole section shouldn't be more than 3, maybe 4 pages total. Even if it's 5 pages, it's still going to be, not that long. And then, yes, if there is much more to say, if you would like to say much more, you can always add either an appendix, or better yet, a link to it. Just put it in a Dropbox or Apple Cloud, and just put a link there so the client can always click on it and then see the rest if they're interested in it. Now let me get to the next section, and this one is the most problematic one, and that's where we need your advice most. Market analysis. So there is one section where teams have to, kind of select a market, explain why they chose that particular market, and then explain or analyze that market, talk about its culture, talk about its political systems, economic situation, maybe trade agreements and stuff like that. And it's a very controversial section, and here is why. On the one hand, this section is the most, let's call it, international business section. So we've had professors like, for example, Daniel Roddick from Florida Gulf Coast University, who before X-Culture had projects where the entire semester's project was analysis of the market. So you would select a company, and then you would select a market for that company, and then all you do is just analyze the market. And so we had frequent discussions with him at different conferences, where he would insist that this section should be at least half of the whole report, because we want the students to analyze the market, to learn as much as possible about its culture, about its, as I said, economic situation, political system, religion, whatever else needs to be said there. And that's what we did in the first, a few semesters when we did X-Culture. In fact, there was a separate report section on the economy, on politics, on culture of the market, and so on and so on. What happened at that time was that many teams would, as I said, dump anything and everything they can find on that country in that section. So we would sometimes literally see like a whole Wikipedia article about that country there, like 20 pages. And obviously that's not very useful. Then we started shrinking that section. We're asking students to keep it more short. And then we would ask, tell us only the things that are specifically unique for this, situation, specifically interesting to this particular client with respect to how they should market the product, how they should hire employees. So don't tell us what the population size is if it's irrelevant to the subsequent recommendations that you will give in the report. Don't analyze religion, for example, if it's irrelevant to your product. Don't talk about climate or whatever else you might find there unless it's something that when you will be making subsequent recommendations, you will say, because of that, factor, this is what you need to do. And again, what that resulted in, some of those analyses were too superficial. They would literally just say, okay, this is the country, this is the population size, and they're democracy, and that's it. So not enough. So the question is, what would be the optimal balance there? What's the best way to analyze that market in a way that it's not too long, not too boring, but at the same time still detailed enough to inform the client about what they need to know about that market to succeed there? What are your recommendations with respect to this important section? Anyone? Don't be shy. All right, so you're smiling, so I'm not sure if you have something to say or yes.
Well, I'll give it a try, I guess.
Right.
So yeah, I think you need to try to put yourself in the shoes of the company a little bit. In most, you really have to think not from the perspective of just a general outsider trying to describe the market, but as you were emphasizing, what are those key things that tie into the situation for the company, and so what would they need to know? And think about the audience. You're writing to a relatively informed audience, the professors, the companies, other students. So what is it that really stands out? You don't have to go dig into the weeds of all the details, but there are going to be things in those weeds that are potentially extremely critical, and so you have to highlight that. So it does take a lot of judgment, so probably in your initial analysis, you need to be very thorough, but when you're actually writing the section, you just focus on those things that from the perspective of the company and for a relatively informed person addressing a situation, what is it that stands out about that particular market that needs to be highlighted?
Yes, as one of the professors said, do more, say less. So when you do the research everything. So, from population size to religion to languages, whatever you can find. But in the report itself, include only the things that are really relevant to this particular client. Better yet, see what factors you took into account when developing the HR strategy, when developing the marketing strategy, maybe thinking about logistics and whatever else, and include those. In fact, I would even have like a little executive summary for each section, including this one, and just say, okay, population, matters because, and like add a line so that the client could see right away which aspects, which factors, or which characteristics of that market they need to pay attention to.
So I'd like to jump in real quick too to echo a point that you were just leading to there. This is about integrating all of the different sections together. So one of the problems that I see in a lot of reports is they're very choppy, and you can tell that one person was assigned to do this section, another person was assigned to do that section, and in fact, the ideas don't always mesh together. Like one person is advocating for this kind of thing, and then it shifts gears, and then it goes in a different direction. So it's really important that as a group, that it's a little late for this with 3 days to go, but that you try to integrate the thinking. I mean, and even just stylistically with the writing and everything, the more integrated it is, the more uniform your approach, the better. We talked about use of bullet points or graphics and charts. If one section is just nothing but bullet points, and then another section is nothing but charts, and then another section is just some text description, that's not appropriate. You want to try to balance those things across all the sections.
I will reiterate.
Amanda, go ahead.
I was going to just back that up with back up what you guys have said. You want to provide in any report, not just X-Culture, as much detail as is relevant and important in the most concise way. That's good writing and very good practice beyond college, graduate school. And it needs to be seamless. It needs to flow from one section to the next in a very clear, easy to follow fashion, and it should not be chunky and obvious that different people put it together. That's just good advice for any writing in any report, in any field, in any industry, for any purpose. Seamless, concise, detailed. It's hard to do. There's a balance between too much detail, too little detail, being too concise. And I always say to my students, or even to professors when they, submit research to peer-reviewed journals and I'm providing, a review of the work, no one's saying necessarily cut chunks out, cut out sections, cut. The idea is to say exactly what you've said. Well, first decide what's important, what needs to be there. If it's all important, figure out how to say it in a more concise manner. And this is actually not a bad tip for if a section from one of your classmates comes back from Turnitin that's totally plagiarized because they copy and pasted from a website. If you cannot get that person to paraphrase and cite, you can cut all of that down into a concise page and then put the rest of it in the back. The content is there. It can be paraphrased and reduced and put in an appendix or put as a citation or something. You don't have to rewrite someone's 5-page section. It can be rewritten in something very short and condensed and put supporting evidence somewhere else or as a good footnote.
Absolutely. If I may switch gears a little bit and go back to the point that Bob made about integration. I'll make a very quick introduction and then we'll ask the panelists to maybe talk about this topic. So one of the very recurrent problems that we see in X-Culture is what Bob talked about, is integration. So many teams would divide up the workload by section. They would say, okay, Amanda, you will work on marketing, Bob, you will work on HR, Henrik, you will work on entry mode, and we will then copy and paste your work at the end of the project. We will copy it and paste in one document, and as a result, we will have, a good final report. And that is a very bad practice because, first of all, the value of the team or teamwork comes from exchanging ideas, communicating, brainstorming. So Henrik or Amanda or I can only do a good work that is as good as my own kind of limit. But if I communicate with my team, if I get advice, ideas from other team members, I can actually go above my normal level because some ideas that you give me, I could have not had ever on my own. And so that is important, that you communicate. And for that reason, we've been experimenting with different formats of X-Culture that would kind of prompt you to collaborate. So in the past semesters, the way it was structured was that each week the team had to submit one report section. Like week 1, they would talk about the company. Week 2, they would submit a draft of the chapter where you talk about the market. Week 3, you would submit the section or draft of the section where you talk about the entry mode, and so on and so on and so on. We didn't like that mode, even though it provided a more efficient way for the teams to work. But what would happen is literally one student works in week 1, another one works in week 2, and so on and so on. So this semester, we started experimenting with the model where you have to submit the whole thing every week. First week, it will be just a few words on each section. Next week, it's a little bit more on each section, and so on and so on, with the hope that students will, at the very least, see what others do because they submit in the whole thing, and as a result, hopefully, at least sometimes comment on it. It did lead to some confusion, and we're yet to see if it's going to improve the quality of the reports. But if you, are annoyed by this requirement that you submit everything every week, the reason for that is because, as I said, we are trying to prompt you to work on every section, every student, even though somebody may be responsible for one section and somebody else for another section. But we want you to see each other's work. So that's the intent. But what happens in many cases, students still not look at each other's work. And as a result, when you read the report, you can tell that each section was written by a different person. And not only the writing style may be different, literally sometimes the advice provided in different sections may be completely different. In fact, sometimes even conflicting. And so that doesn't create a good impression. Second, formatting may be different. So some sections are, better formatted, others are not as well formatted. Sometimes you would see that literally one section may be plagiarized, or one section may be, too wordy or too short. What happens also even more often is, and I did receive a few emails about that already, So you hope that, for example, Bob will do his section and Henrik will do his section and Bas will do his section. And you hope that you will get a copy of that section, last week. And then you either get something and then you submit it to turn it in and it comes back either as fully plagiarized, or you finally start reading it and you understand that it's completely, like, it's very bad. Or sometimes it just doesn't come in. Like Bas was sleeping all semester and he promised to do it, but he didn't. And so you have 2 days left and you realize that his section is not ready. And then we start getting emails from students, and we do get a lot of them that either say, what do we do? We have only 2 days left and one section is not written. How can we, tackle it? Or sometimes even angry emails from students who say, he didn't do his section or he plagiarized his section. I'm not redoing his work because I did my part and I don't care that he didn't do it. And you better not damage my grade because of that, because, I did my work. So professor, you cannot give me a low grade because it was that guy from Ukraine who messed up. So why should I get a low grade? And so my response to that would be, who cares? It's not an exam. We have an exam where I test your individual knowledge. And so that's where you get the grade for your individual knowledge. Xculture is not about you knowing how to answer the questions. It's about you practicing to work as a team, because the client doesn't care what section you wrote. The client wants to see good advice in a nice readable report. And so the client will not look and say, okay, well, Bob Smith did a report section that looks good, but Jane Doe did a report section that is bad. He doesn't care about the authorship of the particular sections. They want to see a nice report, or otherwise they will not pay you your consulting fee. And so when that happens, when the report is choppy, when one of the team members didn't do the report section and the team discovers that only 2 days before the deadline, what should a team do? What would be your advice when you got that sort of question from the students? And as I said, we get a lot of them today. How they should behave, or what should they do in these remaining 2-3 days to address this problem? Any advice? Amanda, your microphone is muted.
Okay, so there's not an easy, I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say as a response. Vasa's advice was very good, and I read all of your emails. This is what you say to students. For me, I will say there is no easy answer to this, right? It's very frustrating when people don't pull their weight and you feel like you have to do the work of somebody else, and they are then going to get credit for it. That makes it even more frustrating. So, but it happens in projects all the time. I distinctly remember being a graduate student and being that person who was chasing after people at the end and saying, I need your citations for this, and rewriting it myself. And it is frustrating, but I cared about the quality of the work and I wanted a good grade and I wanted it to be, my name was on it. So I was that person, and it is annoying. And it feels like in the real world, this would never happen, right? It only happens in school with lazy students, but that is also not true. In the real world, you end up with people on a team that you have to work with who don't carry their weight, and they get credit for it, and their bosses don't care as much, or they're not the expert. They probably shouldn't have been on the team in the first place, or, it's a client and you're dependent on them to help them give them what they want, or it's a supplier who's the only game in town and there isn't somebody else that can make the product in that market. And, or it's somebody that you signed up to do work with and you thought they were going to be better, and you've invested all of this time and they've done some quality work and their name is on it, and you really can't take them off right now, but they haven't been the best person to work with. They're doing the work, but the work needs to be rewritten every single time. I mean, it just happens in the real world all the time. And this exercise of Xculture is purposely designed to put you through that uncomfortable situation where you're going to have people who just don't do the work to the level you would do yourself or expected of them. And your practice and navigating that and figure, now, luckily with this project, you don't have to work with those people again, right? And in future projects, when it happens in the real world, you can choose not to. Sometimes you can't choose. You're stuck with these people. Sometimes you can choose. I will never do a project with that person again. They were horrible to work with. And you finish this one, you move on, and you don't work with them again. And, those people do tend to get found out. I think their colleagues and their professors and their bosses and things really also form the same opinion, and or they don't, and those people skate through life, and it's very annoying, but it is life. That's what I will say. You do the best you can, learn from it. If quality is important, do their work, you know, do it better than they did it, and chalk it up as a learning experience. It's perfectly normal, even though it's frustrating.
Yes, it's not only normal, it's more common than not. So in the future, when you participate in teams, this will happen much more often. Like those of you who have a perfect team where everybody works, that's not a true representation of what's in store for you in the future. And so we have received 4 or 5 emails in the last few days. I discussed it with Simone a few days ago, where teams or team members demand that we exclude 2-3 students from the team these last, few days. They say out of 6 people, only 2 of us did the work, and so we demand that the other 4 be excluded from the team formally. And so we don't know what to say to that, because first, there is really no point in excluding them now. Just give them more peer evaluations and their instructors will know. But second, as I said, this project is not about your grade. This project is not about what you personally did. This project is a time machine, or time viewing machine, that allows you to see what's in the future for you, because it will not be any different. It will not be any easier. And so you shouldn't care, or I don't care that much about what you did versus what your team members did. I care about you seeing what can happen, so that when it happens next time, you're prepared, because believe me, it will happen next time. And so, as I said, it's not about the grade, it's about you being prepared for this same problem, because it will happen again. So, but anyway, we have a few more topics to discuss, and I see we already have here Steve Kramer, who will be talking about plagiarism and citation styles in about 15 minutes. We'll get to him in a few minutes, so Steve, just hang on here. We'll be with you in a few minutes. One other very important question that I would like the panelists to address is the kind of visual appeal, if you will, or general appeal of the report. The truth is, not only with Xculture, but with any report, any reading, that the so-called halo effect is very strong. What you often see is that people start reading the report, and they have either a big book, or they have like 100 reports and don't have the time to read it very, deep in much detail. And so the impressions they get about the document in many cases translates or generalizes to the evaluation of the actual content. And so what often happens is that the document that looks nice, that is pleasant to the eye and easy to read, the document gets high evaluations on things like, for example, economic feasibility or strength of the arguments. And vice versa, if you have very strong arguments, if you have very nice economic advice or recommendations, but your document doesn't look nice, like doesn't look appealing, doesn't look professional, the sentence is difficult to read, what happens in many cases, people just stop reading. So they go through 1 or 2 pages, they try to understand what you're saying, they just give up and move on to the next report, and you get low marks on every single dimension, even though some of them could have been strong. And so the question I have for the panelists is, how can students improve the basically visual appeal or readability of their reports in these remaining 2-3 days, to make sure that they're not looked over or disqualified because of poor presentation? What can be done to make those reports, just more pleasant to the eye? Any advice?
Can I just add something for the last question? Like, what I found really interesting and important when I was a student was actually the punishment of bad students and non-participators in the report. Because it was, for me, the first time in my student career back then that students who didn't participate at all in some reports were punished and kicked out of the team. And I mean, this is like the worst case ever, but it's a really good example to show students what can happen if you are a low performer. And yeah.
Yep.
Just a little mark.
Good point. Yeah. Anyone else on how to make the reports more readable, more pleasant?
I would just say follow the guidelines. There are some very specific guidelines about formatting, margins, indentations, styles, referencing, all of those things. It's also good. I like to see reports that have some different colors to highlight, bold or other things, or color graphics, just something that looks as professional as possible. I mean, really, and this ties back into the last question too, this is an opportunity to really showcase your professionalism in a lot of different dimensions. It's an opportunity to present a well-written document, a well-formatted document, and to participate in a process where you take responsibility for the outcome individually and as a group, and have an ability to demonstrate some leadership in the process too. So if there are students that are lagging behind or not contributing, it's really, I mean, yes, that's frustrating, but it's an opportunity also for you to step up and expand your role, lead by example, and ensure that the final outcome is something that that you can personally vouch for and be proud of.
Yep. One advice I can give, it's hopefully not too late for this semester, when we say or recommend how to divide the workload, one of the best approaches is to divide it by function as opposed to by report section, which means that, instead of saying you do section 1, you do section 2, somebody else does section 3, it's better that when one team member does, for example, research, and one team member does, for example, literature search. And then it's always a good idea to have somebody who will be responsible for the final copy editing. So if you have a native English speaker on the team, I would assign that person this role. And so then when all the individual sections come in, it's always a good idea that somebody who is proficient in the language and maybe also has some report formatting skills goes through the whole thing, makes final adjustments, language, maybe simplifies the sentences, corrects the typos, works on the formatting style so it's the same consistent throughout the report. I've seen teams even add like photos of the team members and maybe a little bio, probably a little too much, but always makes makes the report a little bit more personal. So it's always a good idea to appoint someone who will do it on behalf of the team before you actually submit the final document. All right, so we are almost out of time. Any other suggestions, recommendations that we didn't touch upon? Henrik, yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just one more thing. Like I would, as Bob said, just reminds the students that there is a guideline, and it's always surprising that the students are missing so much and that the report is so bad looking and bad formatted because they don't follow the simple guideline. There's an introduction, there's a, like, you know how to do a report, you read maybe hundreds of books, but still, like these academic students, they miss really basic and simple things. I don't know how to make sure that they just remind this basic things, but maybe just give them a short guideline or booklet or things like this. This is what I was planning this semester, to give them a short, like 1 page, how to have a nice looking report, because this is like the simplest thing you can do. There's nothing to do with the quality of the report, nothing to do with the research and so on. It just one day work in the end, maybe, that someone is responsible for. This is really easy, but like 80% of the reports are missing this formatting, literature style. They don't have a table of contents, they don't have a table of figures, they don't have reference in there. This is really kind of sad and frustrating to see, because these are just a couple of hours work, and this improves your report so much, because in the end, like when you're reading it, it's also about the contents, but it's half of it or 40% of it, it's like the look. Like if it's nice to read, if everything is in a well way. It's my point.
Absolutely. Any other last minute comments? I'd like to conclude with the tip that we gave at the very beginning, that Amanda gave at the very beginning: executive summaries. So make sure that you have all the important points there, and don't tell, as Amanda said, don't tell that first we will have an introduction that will introduce the report. No, say what exactly the actionable points are, or the things that the client needs to pay attention to. And as I said, I would even add a little executive summary or some sort of like a little resume to each of the report sections. For example, I was reading one of the drafts yesterday, and they had a very nice summary for each section. And just as an example, for example, the section where they talked about promotion for Unplag. So they would literally have like a 5 bullet point list, and they would say, okay, decision makers, principals of the schools, ways to reach them, American Associations of School Principals, and that's the email address, things to say, and cheaper than turn it in, yet more effective. And so those little points give me right away a very good summary of what their recommendation is and why they recommend what they recommend. And then I can read the rest of the section for the details. Very convenient to work with. I could go through all the key points literally in 5 minutes, and then some sections were more interesting, so I read them a little bit more in detail. So if you can do it, if you're my student, I'll give you a bonus point, because as I said, 150 reports, I will not be able to read them. So if you make it easy for me to see the key points right away, I'll be very happy and give you a higher grade. All right, so anything else? So we are pretty much out of time. So we have 3 more minutes left, and we are about to start the next webinar. Thank you so much, Amanda and Angelica and Barnabas and Bob and Edwin. Well, Edwin just joined now. Hendrik and Victoria for joining us here, sharing your advice. If you students have any questions, send the emails to us to admin@xculture.org. We'll try to answer them in writing. And so we're going to conclude this webinar now, and we will switch to the next one in a minute that will be more technical and will be specifically on plagiarism. What is plagiarism? What plagiarism is not? How to deal with it? How to cite work of others in a proper academic manner, and things like that. So it will be a little bit more about the technical side of writing the report. So those of you panelists who were in the first one, you're welcome to stick around and participate in the next one. If you need to leave, you can leave, obviously. And so we'll start in a couple of minutes with presentations on plagiarism and academic referencing styles.
Vas, thank you so much for this webinar and for all that you do for all of us for X-Culture. It's been great. Thank you.
Well, it's only because we have wonderful professors like you guys who help every step of the way it's possible. All right, well, thank you so much. So let's take a 2-minute break, and then we will go back to Steve and Maria, who will talk about academic writing styles and plagiarism. Thank you. And so while we're taking this break, I'd like to address Stephen and Maria. So as we discussed, we will start with a more formal presentation by Steve. Steve is our librarian/expert on online research and all kinds of other related things here at the UNCG. And so he will do first a more formal presentation on literally what is plagiarism, how to deal with it, how to detect it, how to avoid it, and then also the academic referencing styles in general, but also a more specific focus on APA, American Psychological Association style, and that's the one that we require of the students. And so he will literally give you a very dry yet informative, step-by-step guidelines on how to cite work of others so it's done properly and easy to use. And then Maria will chime in with a more informal list of tips and recommendations on how to structure the report so it's more readable, more professional, more organized. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers or any last-minute tips and advice on writing the report. And again, those of you watching online, you can always call in, so use that presenter or caller link and join us here in the webinar room and engage in the discussion with the presenters. Feel free to do that at any time. Just click on the link, join here and ask your question, or maybe oppose some of the things that the presenters say, or maybe add a clarifying remark. And then you obviously can just watch it on YouTube if you would like to. And if you have questions, just send them to me, and I will ask them to address them to the presenters. Okay, so it is 10 a.m. in Eastern Standard Time Zone in New York and on the East Coast of the United States. So we're starting the second webinar, and I said it will be a more technical one. So the first hour, we talked more about how to write a report from the content perspective. Now this one will be a little bit more on the form and plagiarism. And so let's start with Stephen Kramer here in Greensboro at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. who is an expert specifically on academic writing, academic research. He works at the library and helps all professors, students with looking for data, presenting it in a proper way. And so today he will talk about specifically plagiarism and referencing styles. It will be a more formal presentation first, and then we'll have a more informal discussion. So Steve, it's all yours now. Those of you who are not presenting, mute your microphones, and yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. Can you hear me okay? All right, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone. So this is indeed going to be a more formal introduction to plagiarism and how to avoid it, specifically how to use plagiarism, quote, paraphrasing or quotations as a way to correctly incorporate sources into your reports. And we're also going to look at some examples, and I'm going to ask you all to think about, is this a good example, bad example? And hopefully in the process, it'll be a more kind of interactive method of learning these processes well. And it will conclude my short introduction with a look at some actual citations, including a basic framework for APA, and then some examples for specific types of sources. And I'll show you a couple of resources that are online for you to help with this as well. Even though I'm in North Carolina, I'm from Michigan, I talk fast. So if I'm not being clear, please indicate that to me either verbally or any other way you can, maybe through chat. So I'll try otherwise to talk slowly and clearly, although that's often a challenge for me, so apologize for that. Vas, I'm going to share my slides, right?
Yes, yes.
Let me know if there's any problems, because it'll be full screen and I won't be able to, of course,
it should still show a small picture of you at the bottom, but the slide should be full screen. Yes, we can see your slides. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So here we go. So I mentioned goals already, illustrating quotes and paraphrases to avoid plagiarism and effect, how to do in-text citations, and also how to have citations at the end of your report. And I like to focus on the positive, so instead of like talking about plagiarism a whole lot, I really prefer talking about how to avoid it. But let's define this just right away. Notice the Latin definition up there, which I think is interesting. So stealing, basically, or being a kidnapper, and that's sort of a metaphor for using other people's language as your own. The UNCG definition, you can see a little less interesting, representing other words as your own. But this is a big deal, and it, of course, might vary from campus to campus, but at UNCG, if you get caught with plagiarism, at the least you have to rewrite your assignment. At the worst, you get kicked out of school. So this is a big deal, even though I'm trying to emphasize the positive aspects of this. Plagiarism is certainly something you need to avoid as much as possible. It's not something you want to do either in your academic life or your professional life. And you often hear about executives, politicians who get caught plagiarizing, and often that leads to their losing their jobs or losing their political power. So it's something to be concerned about. And then really, there's two main techniques to not plagiarize, and those are quoting and paraphrasing. And you probably know what these things are, but we're going to look at examples in just a minute. But just to make it official here, quoting, simply quotation marks around the phrase you are directly using, including an APA in-text citation, which is usually author year, and you'll see examples of that. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. And then paraphrasing, which is a little more challenging, but often makes for more interesting writing, and that's simply rewording someone else's sentence using your own writing style. And some people say this is defined as putting things in your own words, but that's kind of a limiting definition in my opinion, because often you need to use some of these specific technical words used in a original paragraph in your own rewrite. So I prefer writing style being what you're doing here and not using your own words. So that's just a little more kind of interpretation of this. I'm still using an in-text citation. Now let's make some examples. I'm going to first show you an actual quote from some major research tool that you might want to use at some point in school or beyond. And then I'm going to give you an example of a student work, a student rendition of that, and ask you, before I give you the answers, if you think this is a good or a bad way to handle it. So hopefully this will be a little more interesting than me just giving you examples. And I promise I won't read this to you, but an important source is for like exporting, for example, is from the U.S. Department of Commerce. And they have a series of reports called Country Commercial Guide, and they include information like you can see here regarding Brazil. So look at that just real quick. And then assume.
It seems like the slide.
Go ahead.
I'm saying that it seems like your slides are not refreshing. For some reason, it keeps showing the first slide. Is that the
Okay.
point, or because it sounds like you want
No,
to,
it's going fine for me here. I have a double monitor, and I wonder if that's the issue.
oh, maybe it's just showing, oh, yeah, maybe you chose a different monitor and it's showing the actual
I'm seeing it
PowerPoint,
on
not
both.
full screen on one screen.
Sure. Can you
So,
see Can you see the interface now, Boss?
yeah,
In
no,
the PowerPoint edit mode.
no, it still shows just the PowerPoint, like, yeah, it basically shows the PowerPoint program, not
Okay.
the presentation side. And I
Okay.
think if you unshare your screen and then reshare your screen, you can choose which of the two monitors it shows. And so if the actual presentation goes on the other monitor, you should be able to choose which one to show.
I actually was showing it on both just to be sure that one of them hopefully was working.
Or
just
if you want to go to the one that where you were, and instead of going into the presentation mode, just simply go next, probably.
Yeah, I can do that. That's let me minimize the ribbon. Just a minute, please. And remove the preview mode. All right, thank you for telling me that. I'm going to try again.
I think what you had would be fine as long as you then don't go into the presentation mode, but simply kind of skip, slide by slide. We'll still see,
Yep, I understand. I'm ready to do that, except now it doesn't show part. There it is. Okay, can you see my goal slide now?
Yeah, we can see your goal slide, yeah, and I think if you just
good. Now we're good. We'll just do this then. Thank you. Okay. I don't want to repeat all this. So play, and is this being recorded, Boss?
Yes, it's being recorded.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can come back to this later if you want to. So plagiarism definitions. As I mentioned, the two main strategies, quoting and paraphrasing. And now you can see, well, I'm showing you both things now. So on the left side, as I was trying to describe, you have an actual quotation from a major research tool. And on the right side, in the green box, is my student's version of that. So look at this, and I'm just going to give you a few seconds to think about this, then I'll talk about it. Is this an effective way to either quote or paraphrase the text on the left side? Okay, and given our nature of online discussion, I'm just going to tell you what I think. This is probably not a good example. Notice it is basically, the quote is, oops, it's a danger of using this mode. It's basically using the exact same language of the text without any attribution quotation marks. So this is a bad example. On the other hand, look at this one. And notice on the right side, the green box, I made two changes to what we had previously. And you notice quotation marks around the quoted text and the year here. And this is already adding another level of detail. I have the author in the text, in the sentence I wrote. And if you have the author's name worked into the sentence, you can then just use the date by itself. So instead of author year down here, we have the author up here and the date. And this is a perfectly acceptable way to go. So a quotation. If you have a complex sentence or a short phrase you want to use, just put in quotation marks and add the author year, or in this case, authors up here in a sentence, and the years down here in parentheses. And that is a perfectly good way to handle not plagiarizing this text while still using it. All right, another example. So read the original text on the right, on the left, excuse me, on the left. And notice what's missing from the right side.
If I may add here, the
Please.
way Turnitin works, it's programmed to catch anything that has more than 5 words in a row, matching exactly the source. So if you're paraphrasing, if you keep like 2 words or 3 words exactly the same, it's still kind of okay from the technical point of view. But if it's more, it will catch and underline it. And so I'm not sure if paraphrasing is the best way to go. It's probably better, like in this example, to simply quote and provide the source. No shame in that. But so you know that it will catch even if it's only a few words that you actually copied and pasted.
Good. Thank you, Vas. And we'll see some paraphrasing examples just in a second. So here you can see what's missing is the in-text citation. It should say Political Risk Yearbook 2017, probably right at this point after the quotation marks. So that's missing from this one. So again, trying to kind of get you to think about this as opposed to me just telling you what you should do. All right, one more or 2 more examples. So pretty long quote. Apologize for that length of that quote on the left. And notice there's no quotation marks over here in the green side. However, I think this is a pretty good paraphrase, basically summarizing the sentence here regarding the 14-year-olds or older to say that strict codes against child labor and other evidence of that. So I think this is an effective paraphrase. So not quoting the text, rewriting this using my own language, my own writing style. And again, since the author, The Economist magazine, some of you may know this magazine, it's arguably one of the most important international English language business magazines, doesn't tend to use authors' names. It only uses Economist as the author of the articles. And so Economist is in the sentence and then the year here. So that's one way to paraphrase it, including the in-text. And one last example. So a table from the World Bank regarding foreign direct investment for 3 countries. And notice the sentence below here in green. So do you think, just think for yourself, is this a good or bad example? Does this avoid or does this not do plagiarism? As it put it another way.
Looks good to me.
It is kind of a paraphrase. So you're taking this $75 trillion number up here for 2015 Brazil and adding the author. The World Bank is the author of the data. So the data author, the statistical author is the author, and then the year of the data, 2015. So this, and the other point here is that you need to cite more than just words. If you're using numbers from any source, that needs to be included as well. So basically, you need to cite almost everything that you might use. So web pages, books, articles, a report like that Plagiarism yearbook, numbers of any sort, images. And if you quote something someone said in person or through a blog, a podcast, or any television programming, or on YouTube, you got to cite that as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive set of things you need to take care of. All right, moving into
question. Can I ask a question about that slide? Can you go back to that one with the table?
Yep.
Yeah. So would it be fair to say that the reason students should cite the source is not only to avoid being accused of plagiarism, but also to provide more credibility to the statement? So when I say 75 trillion and I show where the data come from, not only am I acknowledging the author, but also I'm kind of, supporting my numbers. It's not just a number that I made up. It's a credible number that I show where I got it from a credible source. So would it be fair that they should cite it not only because they don't want to be caught, plagiarizing, but also to improve the credibility of their words and statements?
That's a great point. And that's one reason why when I talk about this, I like to focus on the positive and not just plagiarism. But like you said, this establishes that you did good research, that you found important, authoritative, accurate sources, and that you want to show off your research skills as well. And also that this improves your recommendations. If you're making recommendations on this data, well, you're recommending World Bank data, United Nations data, and other types of data sources, and it makes you look smarter and more credible. So I agree with you absolutely that it supports you as a person, as a team, as well as avoiding plagiarism. So it benefits you in more ways than one. Good, thank you for adding that. So just a few more nitty-gritty details, then we'll wrap this up. So there is a book called the APA Publication Manual, which is where we get APA citation from. The caveat here is that this supports psychology research, not business research. The manual actually allows us to be flexible. It says in the introduction that we can actually look at the standards it provides and sometimes be flexible or use good judgment. So sometimes we have to sort of, frankly, interpret the guidelines to fit the business research needs. And I'm going to help you with this by giving you this URL. And just brief, I don't want to switch applications right now, but I have on those 2 pages on this library guide, basically samples of citing about 50 different business tools. Some of them are free, some of them are databases your library may or may not pay for, but it gives you sample citations as well as some videos on this topic as well that will help you out. And they will help you figure out kind of how to handle the business stuff that may not have a counterpart in the manual. But just to review the main points, kind of already talked about this briefly, but here's more an official introduction. So inside your text, in all the examples we just looked at, many of them that did this well had these. You have an author year pair inside the sentences or at the end of a sentence. And these authors, and this is important, can be both a person's name if it's a personal author, like if it's Taras or Martinez, but it can also be an organization, a company, some sort of entity. We call that a corporate author. So World Bank can be a corporate author. Microsoft, you're citing Microsoft's annual report. or their SEC 10K filing. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. Those are also authors. So you can have a company or an organization or a nonprofit or a governmental agency be an author as well. And often the good stuff is written by those agencies, and so you should have that too. And as you saw examples of, if you work the name of the author into a sentence, like according to the World Bank, comma, then you only need the year at the end. You don't need to have World Bank 2016 repeated once again. I think that makes it look more readable, and that's a standard APA, all right? Now, more complicated, of course, is how to do the full citations that show up at the end of the report. There's a basic structure, which you can see here. So author, first initial if there is, if it's a person, otherwise it could be a company name, as I mentioned. The year, a title, source. I'll give you examples of this in a minute. And retrieved from. So that's a basic structure, but it's going to vary what you see depending on what kind of source it is. So 5 concluding slides here for me, basically 5 different types of examples. So articles, and you can sometimes use online tools like citationmachine.net. My guide helps with this, Purdue OWL, you can Google those names and you can get some tools that will help you with articles. They're somewhat easier to cite typically, and I won't read this out to you, but just note that some articles have page numbers and volume and issue numbers like this one does, and some don't. So you might need to be flexible regarding that. 2 more quick points. Titles, political statements, send a costly message. You only capitalize the APA titles, or specifically the first word in titles and any proper name. So a country name, an organization, a personal name will get capitalized, but only those and the first letter. So don't capitalize everything, just capitalize the first letter and then any proper name if there is one in there. And then you italicize the journals. And again, my guides online will help you with this as well as the other ones I mentioned too. All right. A few more examples, getting a little more specialized here. Web page. Notice the long URL, kind of word wrap's funny, and it looks funny, but it should all be there complete. Corporate author. So we have, we have Ford coming in, and the year, and then the title, only the first word capitalized. Now this is something different than we just saw. When you're studying web page, or also data sets, we'll see the example of that in a couple slides, include the retrieval date. And if you're wondering why you should do this, you all know that web pages can change without warning. The content can change. The URL can disappear. And so having this protects you when your professor looks at this and cuts and pastes this URL into his or her web browser and wonders, well, what this page is missing, so did you plagiarize? And that could be the case, but more likely you did it right. And it's just that web page changed since then. And having this date allows you to tell the professor, well, when I looked at this last week or a month ago, it was there. And there actually are archival tools to help dig up old web pages like that. But typically, the retrieval date protects you, make sure that you can claim that the page was there when indeed you looked at it. And no periods at the end of the URL. All right? Now, data, I had a World Bank example table earlier. Here's a citation for similar data. It's a different data. It's a different data point, CO2 emissions. But same idea. You have the corporate author, World Bank, the name of the data you're quoting, and then you simply say data retrieved from the date from where it came from. This is the online data set from the World Bank, World Development Indicators. So like with web pages, data can change. It can disappear. They can add new numbers that may not be there when you first looked at it. So retrieval date helps with that. And there's a APA rule that you can either use citation, a full URL, like we had here for this forward page, or if it's a database you're getting it from, whether a free database like World Development Indicators in the World Bank, or whether it's a library database the library pays for you to use, for free to you, but the library pays for it. You don't need to use a URL. So either use a URL or use a database name, but not both. And that makes your URL shorter and easier to use, hopefully. Right, 1 or 2 more examples. Report, we had an example from this report earlier in my examples. PRS group is the author, and they had an exact date. So if you have an exact date, put the year first, then the full month name. Don't abbreviate. Don't say NOV dot or December. Don't do DEC dot. Just the full month and the day, if there is a day. Name of the report, only the B gets capitalized. The name of the source, and then it came from this database. So short and sweet. And that's the end of my examples. And just a reminder that from this URL here, you can get other examples for different websites, databases, and data sets. And any questions at this point? I'm going to close this out.
We have lots of questions via email, so we'll probably get to them in a minute.
That's
But
awesome.
so one thing that I would like to say, and maybe I'll show my screen here. So let me see if I will be able to do it quickly. But so if you're not sure, if you see my screen here, if you're not sure how to cite, all you have to do is you just go to your web browser, and I hope you can see mine here, and you just type APA citation style examples, and you will have literally hundreds of pages with examples. And I will just click on the first one just as an example. And right here, you will have like a table, how to cite in text, and you would have, examples of one author, two authors, three authors, six, group, book chapter, article, book title, all that stuff. So you'll just have examples, and you have many of those sources. And I think we even cite one of them in the instructions for the students. And you just follow that. So just look at the example, and that's all you need to do. So lots of resources on the web, and it's much easier than it looks. And so for the Xculture project itself, it's not that critical that you do it absolutely right. As long as you cite your sources and the style is kind of okay, it's okay. But I encourage you to spend a little extra time and to do it very right. And the reason for that is because in your professional career, as a student, then as a professional, you will have to cite work of others all the time. And so the earlier you learn how to do it, the better you will, basically it's a boost to your career. It's just like, learning how to type with all 10 fingers. The earlier you learn how to do it, the earlier you will start saving time. Because, while you still type with one finger, like this, and not invest in time in learning, each time you have to type, you lose time. So same thing here. Use this as an opportunity to learn how to do it, and it will serve you throughout your entire career. So don't put it off. Spend extra time now so that you save time later.
Bas, let me show you one more thing, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
briefly.
yeah, go ahead.
Yep. This won't take long. Showing my screen. The sources Vas showed you are the ones I mentioned, like the Purdue OWL, but they do not cover business content. So if you want that kind of thing, I'm now at my library guide I mentioned, and I have this long document. And for example, if you are citing United Nations data, I do give you examples of how to cite that data. So for business examples, use my guide, because you won't find those other places. They just do journals and psychology research, because that's officially what APA does. So this may help you citing census data and other international research tools that may help you out as well. So that's all. Thank you, Bas.
So Steve, students who are not at the UNCG, if they wanted to find this resource, what would they Google for?
It's a free website. So just use the URL that I had on my slides, and I can actually, good reminder. Let me post this URL into the chat box.
Yeah, or maybe just post it full screen, because I'm not sure if the URL will be visible when people watch it on YouTube. But if you just post it full screen for a few seconds, so you can just retype it. So maybe increase the size of this. Yeah. So, but it's libraryguides.com Xculture. Oh yeah, actually just go to the UNCG library and put Xculture. Yeah,
so
that
UNCG
was specifically created for you guys, custom name.
libguides.com/x-culture. And even though some of the links here are for UNCG only sources, the citation guide and the other pages are free to anyone around the world. So these are always available to you. There's also a guide for how to cite tables and cite APA as well.
Yeah, even if you're not a UNCG student.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, so before we get into the questions, Maria, would you want to share your insights now, and then we'll get into question answer mode? We have another presenter. Maria, are you still here? Yeah, go ahead, please, if you would like to say a few words. For some reason, we cannot hear you, so it seems like your microphone is unmuted, but at the same time, there is no sound. I wonder if it's what could happen. I see you using earphones, and it probably has a microphone there. But if you go to the settings on the top of your screen, like click on that gear, it will allow you to choose the microphone. And what can be happening is it may be going through the internal microphone, or vice versa. Or maybe just pull out the microphone and just use whatever's in the computer. See if that will work. If I can show you my screen. So here is what you would need to do. You would go to, I'm not sure if you have exactly the same interface, but you would go to this settings button. It can be in a different part of the screen because I have the administrator's mode, so it could be a little different. And then once you click on it, you will have this, audio settings, and you'll click here and you will select the microphone. And it sounds like, or looks like by default, it chose their own microphone, and so that's why we do not hear you. So if you want to try that, you might want to, because I think that's what's happening. That's why we don't hear you. And it seems like Maria logged out. but she's logging in again. Okay, Maria, do you want to try again? Say something? Oh,
Okay.
we hear you. Yes, good. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello everyone. I'm Maria and I'm coaches in X Culture. I'm going to talk about based on papers that are reviewed and papers outside. Well, I would like to with some useful tools that I normally use when I cite my papers when I'm a student. So like I will try to screen share my computer.
If you want to share your screen, again, there is like a screen share button, usually either on the left side menu or sometimes at the bottom, and then just.
Okay.
It seems like we're still seeing you and not your screen. Oh, okay, good, good. It's working. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so like the first website that I want to, well, no, I want to show you Microsoft Word is built with a referencing tool that anyone can use to help them reference their paper. It's like, it's over here in this references tab, and it has like insert footnote, and it even has this manage sources, and you can choose which style you want to.
You're absolutely right. You're right. New Microsoft Word actually has built-in citation function, and you're right. You can choose the style, and it works with Google Scholar directly. So you're absolutely right. You have automated tool right in your Microsoft Office.
Yeah. Well, I'm using Word 2016, but as far as I know, I think the previous version of Word also has this function, but I kind of don't really recommend this tool because sometimes Microsoft Word doesn't update the edition of the referencing style. But unless you have like version of the good, like this, mine is updated. It's like APA 6 edition, and also I find the edition tool is kind of complicated, to be honest. So what this website. Where is it? Okay, this website called Cite This For Me, because a good list of different citation styles and choose from here, and it's a very good website that I want to recommend because like it really organizes your references, and it's very mobile because it's online, and they save your references as well. Like I'll give you an example of one of my.
It looks like Microsoft Word, but it's actually in browser, right?
Sorry. I'm just recommending a website that I prefer more than Microsoft Word.
Right. Yes. So yeah, it seems very user friendly. Yeah.
Yes, and it even has a tool to download directly to Microsoft Word. And I'll just give you an example of one of my references that I did. For example, I did like this consumer behavior essay. Like there is this organization tool, so you can like, if every time you have a new paper, you can just create a new bibliography and put the name of the paper. For example, like this, you can just easily send to Word or like copy the in-text citation here automatically, and this is like the bibliography. You can also copy it directly to Word. This is by the way, this is using Harvard style, but like if you want to APA style, but you can choose Harvard if you prefer like other references. But yeah, and they also have this very user-friendly tool, like so depending on what kind of sources you use. For example, if you use like newspaper or website, you can just click on them, and then they will automatically to have you put the information of the citation. And the website it's available free and also price. I'm not sure it's more limited, but pretty much you have you get all the like convenience. But even with premium, the price is not much. I think I consider it is quite cheap actually. So like those are like the two options that I can. And also another website that I want to recommend is this website. I think I find
Maria,
this website also very.
Can you stay here? Just can you stay back to the website again, Maria? Just for one more second, back to the website, the page that you showed before. No, the one.
Which one? This one?
Yeah. So I see there they have the Chrome plugin. No, the other one. The other one. Side this. So I see they have Chrome add-on, so plugin. So I assume once you install this in your Chrome browser, it will allow you to, once you found the source online, you can probably be able, click on that, like add to bibliography, and it will probably automatically download it so you can cite it later. This is, it seems to be very similar to the professional software called EndNotes that most professors use. And they do cost money, so you probably don't need to buy that. But as far as the interface and functionality, it seems to be similar. And so I assume that would be like a free version. And yes, you can plug it in and install it directly in your browser. And so then every time you find something online, you just click, download in my library. It will do that. And then later you can always just say, okay, cite this source. And it will automatically format it properly, automatically plug it in the text, add the citation in the reference section. So it seems like a very powerful free tool. So it might take you, a few minutes to figure out how it works. And I have no doubt that there would be like a 5-minute video guide online that will show you step by step how to use it. But again, every minute you lose now on, or invest now on learning how to use it will save you lots of time down the road. So that's a very useful source. I didn't know about its existence.
Boss, there's actually a number of examples like that. Zotero, EndNote, EasyBib, Reference Manager, for example. Some of those have plugins to use with Word. So instead of cut and pasting, you dynamically pull your citations into Word, and automatically adds in text and your EndNote citations. And you can also instantly change to another style. So Zotero is one we teach a lot at UNCG, and grad students like it. It's free, it's open source, so you can use it. If you move to different cities or different campuses, you keep using it. But there are a lot of these out there, and many of them function very well. And so I do recommend, like you said, and like Maria said, to any student, use one, get to know it, and after 5 minutes of work, you will save many hours, literally hours of time with big projects at least. So there are a bunch of tools out there you can use. These are all good examples.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I personally, I never actually tried the Chrome add-on, but they also have a plugin for Microsoft Word. But when I tried it, my Microsoft Word crashed every time. So I don't know. But for me, even though it's already, oops, sorry. And okay, so next I want to recommend this website from Purdue University. I believe I've been using this since high school, to be honest, and they have a really they also have really good detailed guide on how to reference with APA, and they use 6th edition already. And one thing I want to point out is like with quotations, because in some papers that I read, some students really like to use quotation, and I'm not sure if they know that APA has a word limit. Like, for example, like like this one, in this part, it's explained that if the quotation words are more than 40 words, you need to have a different formatting style than like quotes that are less than 40 words, like this. That's one thing. This like general format, and what is that? Yeah, and this like the basic rules of APA. It's all like explained here. This one good website that I would like to recommend. Yeah.
Very useful. Very useful.
Yeah. Yeah. And also when I read the student papers, I often also found that like students like to put like quotation, but then they forgot to put the citation. So, well,
Right.
I've been reviewing the draft, but like I don't know if they will put the citation later or not. But then like I think it's quite risky to just copy paste from a website or put information online from any online websites, and do not put the URL or any citation, because like you tend to forget. I usually would recommend people to, even if they haven't paraphrased the information, I would usually recommend them to put the URL at least, or the in-text citation there directly, so they don't forget to cite. That's yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, Maria. Now, a few questions that I have that I received via email, and we talked a little bit about them in the previous webinar session, but this time it's specifically about about plagiarism. And so the question is this: there are about 5 teams that asked that in the last 2 days. So as you know, 1 week before the final deadline, so basically last weekend, each team had to submit a draft to turn it in. And the reason we asked them to do that is twofold. On the one hand, we want teams to have something ready in advance, because otherwise teams wait until the last day and then try to do something literally last minute. So by imposing a deadline 1 week earlier to have a full complete draft, we kind of push them to do something earlier so that they have enough time to make the final adjustments later on. But also one big reason for that is we allow students to check their work for plagiarism. And so what happens in some teams, and that's the question that we received, is they would, each write a section or something like that, or, a portion of the report. They would copy and paste it into one document. One team member submits the document to turn it in, and it comes back and it shows that sections have been plagiarized. So like sometimes it's several pages copied and pasted. And so the teams have only a few days left, and sometimes they discover that substantial portions of the report have been literally copied and pasted. And so then the question is, what should they do about that at that time? Should they try to paraphrase and kind of hide plagiarism that way? Should they try, completely delete that part and, just not include it at all? Should they try to rewrite it from scratch? In some cases, teams even say, can we submit another draft and check it again for plagiarism? Because what we did is we paraphrased as much as possible, and we would like to see if now turn it in we'll flag it for plagiarism, which in my opinion is a bad practice, because it's not so much about using different words. It's about providing original work. And if you use work of others, paraphrased or word to word, it's probably still better to provide a source. I mean, there is no harm in that. So why would you want to hide that you used somebody's source by paraphrasing it and checking it until Turnitin cannot catch it? So, but anyway, when a team finds itself with a section of the report plagiarized and only 1 or 2 days left before the deadline, what should they do about it? Any advice? I don't know, Steve, you as an independent external person, what would you say to a team like that?
All right, let me make sure I got all that, boss. If it's good information they're trying to use, I would not simply cut the entire section. I would try to paraphrase it or quote it as you can. Identify the most important sections or sentences, and as Maria noted, if it's long, you need to indent it, but let's not get into those details just yet. So I would try to break it up into pieces, use quotations and or paraphrasing to summarize the main idea, and continue to use that source. I think this is a good learning opportunity, frankly, not just to cut it all out and totally remove the problem, but try to fix what you've got and use it effectively through paraphrasing and quoting.
How much time do you think it would take? Let's say a team has 3 pages that have been completely copied and pasted.
3 pages.
How much time do you think it will take them to do it right? I'm just trying to see, if you plan on spending a whole day on that or just a few minutes and they will be fine.
It depends on the writing style of the students, but could be an hour or more. That's 3 pages a lot. If it's 3 pages of purely quoted, paraphrased text.
Like if it's about an hour, and that would be my estimate, totally worth investing that time now to avoid punishment later. Would it be okay not to do anything about that and just submit it with plagiarism and hope that it will go,
No, that's reason to get a failure marked.
Right.
That's reason to lose all academic work this semester.
Right.
You just don't do that. It's not appropriate.
Chances are your report will be disqualified from the competition.
And I know there's cultural differences between using sources referring to authority figures across the world, but and I'm sure you discussed this with students, Voss, since we're doing international culture here by definition of this project. But in the Western world, it's totally unacceptable to do that. So no, you need to either cut it out or fix it. So
one of the funniest things that I get about that is when we ask students why, or when they try to explain to us why they plagiarized, we have two commonly used explanations.
okay.
One is I don't speak English as my first language, and I found something online that looked perfectly fine to me. So why would I want to try to put it in my own words with errors when I can just copy and paste somebody else's work that is so nicely saying what I want to say? Wouldn't my client be happier to see nice language, even if it's copied and pasted, versus try to read my poor English language? And so obviously it's a bad explanation to me, but that's one we get all the time.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah,
But if I know it's work, but if you reworked it, you would learn it. If you're cutting and pasting 3 pages of text, you may have read it and you might understand the main points, but I would question if you really intellectualize it, if you really understand what you're working on, which means you're paying tuition for schoolwork, but you may not be getting the full value of that education. So if you paraphrase it or quote it well, you probably have to understand it very well, which means when you talk to someone, when you interview for a professional position, when you go up for a promotion in your job, you'll have better skills and better knowledge to succeed in those things. So I think reworking 3 pages of text would help you understand it better. And that's one argument against simply cut and pasting English text as a non-English speaking student.
Yeah.
Or me, if I know some German, if I cut and pasted 2 pages of German because I just didn't want to fully handle paraphrasing the German, that would be the similar thing regarding that learning. So it helps yourself. I mean, it's you may think that this is all just turning in, getting your work done, getting a grade, but this is to improve yourself as a person, make you a better candidate, make your life more interesting, and so there's value in that as well.
Yeah. Another thing that I would like to add here is that it would be what surprises me, what puzzles me, is why would anyone in X-Culture ever copy and paste work of others in an X-Culture report? I can see why you might want to do it in a book or maybe in a paper that you're writing for a different purpose. But X-Culture, it's not a paper, it's not a novel, it's not, it's a set of recommendations for the company. And I'm always very surprised why and how students manage to find things that they would like to copy and paste. The point here is to write as a concise report as possible and just give your recommendations. And I know for a fact that nobody else gave those recommendations to this client online. So like, for example, the copied and pasted section from Wikipedia, it's completely useless. Like, you don't need it in the business proposal because you're writing a business proposal. You're not writing something else. So just say what you recommend. Like, why would you want to copy somebody else's work? The only time when you might want to copy and paste something, that's when you want to support your argument. That's when, for example, yes, you're saying that, this market is $75 billion. And that's when you would like to cite a source. You say, like, World Bank said that. And so you provide the source. But in that case, again, you don't have to copy and paste their paragraph. You just copy and paste the number that they, or, cite the number that they provided. So the only time you really want to copy somebody's work, that's when you're trying to support your argument with a number or maybe with some sort of, finding from a study. But in those cases, you don't even need to copy the sentence. You just say what they said and provide a source. That's it. So what I see many times, people, like when they do the analysis of the market, they would literally, copy and paste sections of the Wikipedia articles that describe that country. But again, in X-Culture, you don't need that. You just say, okay, that country is this big. That country is, I don't know, democracy, has Christian religion or Muslim religion or whatever. Like, you don't need to copy and paste whole pages. So if you are compelled to copy and paste more than one number or one sentence, chances are you don't need to include it at all. Chances are it's a poor fit for your report. You don't need it because it's a business proposal. It's not a paper, in the traditional sense. So I just don't see why some teams do it, because, the only other thing that I can think when you might want to copy and paste is if you find somebody else's X-Culture report, not just any report, but specifically X-Culture report, and you really like the recommendations that they have, and then you copy and paste that, which is obviously plagiarism and it's bad. But at least in that case, what you copy and paste kind of fits your story. Everything else, it's not for this type of document. So it just, if you're copying and pasting, you're probably doing something wrong, not because plagiarism is wrong, but because it's not what the report wants from you. So yeah, that's, if I could share that observation. Anyway,
and I think that's one thing that makes X-Culture so interesting, is that students are writing real analysis, recommendations, critical thinking. You see a lot of papers students write where they're citing sources, and I'm sure it's worthwhile, but they're just summarizing literature, basically, and not necessarily coming to a conclusion based upon their own critical thinking and recommendations. And I think the projects here do, require you to think that way, and that's really important learning. So I think that's a great thing about X-Culture, and definitely makes sure what you're saying makes sense, because there is indeed no reason to cite quote a lot of stuff. That's not the nature of it. It's not just dumping information. It's leading to recommendations for the company, and that tends to align itself well with citing and paraphrasing short texts and not dumping data and dumping text from other sources into the paper, into the report.
Absolutely. All right, well, we are out of time. Hopefully you found this useful. If you have any other questions, just send them to admin@xculture.org and we will try to answer them in text. Thank you so much, Steve and Maria, for taking time and sharing your knowledge with students. If the feedback will be positive, maybe we'll do it again next semester. The recording will be available for those who missed the live session, and they can always watch it. And thank you so much, the presenters. All right, so I'm going to switch off here.